Good evening, explorers! I'm Explorer Torie, and welcome to another episode of Native Nevada Nature provided by the Nevada Conservation League. It's our weekly series to highlight one plant or one animal species right here in Nevada. Today we have a very special guest. Would everybody give a warm explorer welcome to Explorer Nestor? Explorer Nestor, say hi.
Hi everyone, my name is Explorer Nestor, as Tori was mentioning, and I'm super excited to be here today with Nevada Conservation League, and we're going to be talking about one of my favorite native plants, which is the Mojave Yucca.
Yeah, Explorer Nestor is a native plant enthusiast and researcher, so he's going to be showing his own research in this presentation. And as he said, today we're talking about the Mojave Yucca. It's also called the Spanish dagger, as a lot of yuccas are. Also called tadillo. It's known by the genus species Yucca sedigera. The yucca part of Yucca sedigera is a Haitian word for yucca because the young inflorescence sometimes are roasted for food, just like the yucca root. Of course, if you look into your grocery stores and you find yucca, it's not going to be the same as this yucca. That yucca has one C. This one has two. Sedigera is from the Latin word meaning sparing a splinter of wood, and this is alluding to the coarse marginal fibers at the edge of the leaf blade. Now, if you watched our Native Nevada Nature on the Joshua tree, then you already know that what yuccas are, but they're the genus of perennial shrubs and trees that are part of the asparagus family, a subfamily of agaves, actually in the lily class. So all these are all related somehow. There's about 40 to 50 species notable for their rosettes of evergreen, tough, sword-shaped leaves and large terminal panicles of white or whitish flowers, as you can see in the top left corner. They are native to hot and dry arid parts of the Americas and the Caribbeans. So they all kind of look like sharp, pointy rosettes of bayonet-shaped leaves. Now, how to identify a Mojave Yucca in particular? Mojave Yucca is a small evergreen tree/shrub, growing up to about 16 feet tall. They have a dense crown of spirally arranged bayonet-like leaves on top of a conspicuous basal trunk. That trunk is very important for the definition. The bark is a gray-brown, being covered with brown dead leaves near the top, becoming irregularly rough and scaly rigid closer to the ground. So you can kind of see that in the right picture. As the leaves fall down, they kind of make the top of the trunk, but the bottom is nice and rigid and coarse. The leaves are broad at the base. They come to a point, very pointy, and they are a yellow-green color. The flowers are white, sometimes having a purple tinge, bell-shaped, and they are produced in a compact, bulbous cluster at the top of the stem. Usually a stalk will grow out and you'll see a big cluster of flowers every year. But these two pictures are pretty good at showing you exactly what a Mojave looks like. Of course, we got the banana yucca. Both are similar in region, similar areas, and they look very much alike. So the top picture is our Mojave yucca. The bottom is the banana yucca, which is Yucca baccata. I'm going to try to describe to you guys the difference between the two. So the first off, the easiest way to tell them apart is the color of their leaves. If you look really closely, the banana yucca leaves are bluish green. They kind of have a lighter green tinge, and the Mojave yucca's leaves are green or yellow-green, much brighter green. Also, the banana yucca does not have a trunk and grows directly on the ground, whereas the Mojave yucca has that basal trunk and it grows up as it gets older. But like I said, they're very alike. They are very much related, and they hybridize when they're next to each other. So sometimes they will breed and make things look a little bit more like each other. So you'll find that in parts of the Mojave Desert where their regions overlap. Speaking of regions, this is a map of the regions where you can find the Mojave Yucca. You can find them all over the Mojave Desert, Nevada, California, Arizona, and small parts of Utah. If you look closely into California, you can actually see it heading towards the coastal Pacific coast and even into some small islands. That's because the Mojave Yucca can be found in most common in the Mojave Desert, dry, arid area, but it can also be found in the chaparral portions of the Pacific coast. So it's kind of interesting that you can find such a desert dweller right next to the ocean. They can be anywhere from elevation from 0 to 5,900 feet, usually around 2,800 to 5,000 feet. They are mostly found in desert slopes and nice flatlands of the desert. In Nevada, you can find them in low desert shrub communities in the Newberry Mountains, and the creosote white burr sage vegetation type in the Spring Mountains, which are very close to Las Vegas. All right, let's talk about the life of a Mojave Yucca, what it's like to be a Mojave Yucca from a seed to a full-grown adult. Just like all yuccas, they depend on a mutualistic relationship with its pollinator, the yucca moth. The yucca moth collects pollen from several flowers, rolls it up into a ball, and carries it to the other flowers and forces it down the stigma tube. Moths lay their eggs in the ovary after fertilizing the flowers, and the moth larvae feed on developing seeds. So this is something that all yuccas share. They depend on this yucca to help breed and pass on the seeds and get them ready for germination. Speaking of which, I know Explorer Nestor has actually had success in germinating his own Mojave Yucca. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, Explorer Torie. So I did germinate a lot of Mojave Yucca seedlings actually this year in February. I'm taking advantage of all the rain that we get from the Pacific Ocean. And so my experience with germination of this plant has been pretty rewarding. It's a very unique plant. And when I initially germinated them, I got about 20 to 30 little seeds germinate. And if you can see here on our slideshow, the left picture is a Mojave Yucca that's only a couple days old. So it just really looks like a nice, cute little needle of grass. You can't tell the difference. And these plants are very, very slow growers. So that was the left picture, it's a baby. And then on the right, that picture I just took a few days ago of the same plant. Well, they're a different plant, but the same, same species. And this one is 7 months old. So at 7 months, that's how it looks. Still quite not the same, big spiky plant you see out in the desert. And if you see on the left side, I wrote a little excerpt. These plants are so slow at growing, so by the time I die, maybe if I get lucky, maybe I can see them at a couple feet tall, and definitely no flowers.
Mm-hmm. So as Explorer Nestor said, they go really slow. They don't require much water. They usually like full sunlight, but it will take many, many years for them to grow into the Mojave.
Explorer Torie, you know what? That's a good point, because I forgot to mention a lot of my seedlings did die, unfortunately. I wasn't watering them enough. So that was the most surprising thing about growing the yucca, the Mojave Yucca, was that they need so much water to survive even as seedlings. So, I came into this experiment thinking, they're native, right? They don't need so much water. But so many of them died due to dehydration. And that's how you know that out in the wild, yuccas need so much rain. And scientists haven't been able to find any baby yuccas. They've only found a few in the past years, and that's, it's kind of alarming, but that's how it is. They just need so much water to get a good start. They need 5 years, at least 4 or 5 years of good seasonable rain so that they could ensure their survival.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. They need 3 to 5 years of consecutive favorable moisture conditions to actually be established. And once they're established, they'll be slow growing and be there for probably longer than we are around. Of course, that's not the only way that Mojave Yucca breed. They can either sprout from seeds when fertilized by the yucca moth, or they can clone themselves by rhizome extension, producing copies of its own DNA within its sprouts. So it will, underground, the rhizome will spread out, and then it will emerge up, sprout up, and there'll be an exact copy right next to you. Just like the creosote bush, where we talked about a couple of weeks ago on the last Native Nevada Nature, the Mojave Yucca actually form rings of their clones. They could be as large as 20 feet in diameter and have as many up to 130 stalks. Rings are rare, like this one seen in this picture, and they're thought to be at least 2,100 years old. So on the average, they say that a Mojave Yucca could be anywhere between 200 to 500 years old, and even longer, it looks like. Now we'll talk about them in the community. Because the Mojave Yucca tends to be one of the tallest plants in this area, a lot of different animals have been able to utilize that and take advantage of it. So there's desert spiny lizards that tend to crawl up the Mojave Yucca. They use it as a way to kind of search their area and also bask in the sun. Desert tortoises also use the understory as shade in hot days. Because it's super tall or can be tall, a lot of it provides hunting, roosting, and nesting sites for birds. There have been, I think, 10 resident bird species that have been shown in these desert scrub communities where the Mojave Yucca is common. There have been studies that indicate Merriam kangaroo rats, white-tailed antelope squirrels, wood rats, rabbits. They all feed on the Mojave Yucca and utilize the Mojave Yucca for nest sites and materials. Even post-fire sprouts, after a fire breaks out, the sprouts can be used as a food source for many animal communities. But they're not the only ones that utilize the Mojave Yucca. I think I gave a preview for this species as having 100 or so uses. So Explorer Nestor, why don't you talk about some of the uses we've had with the Mojave Yucca?
Yeah, so thank you, Explorer Torie, for handing it over to me. As far as the historical and the traditional uses, it's been one of the most significant plants in the native community, and historically it's considered one of the most important too. So to start off, the flowers, when the yucca blooms, when the flowers are nice and young, they're actually really sweet in flavor, and they're ate raw as kind of like as a fruit. But as the flowers get older, they get a soapy taste in them, so they have to be cooked and grounded into a meal. And the plant itself, it's used to make ropes, sandals, and baskets. And let's see, the Coahuila natives use the leaves to make torches out of the dried yucca leaves. And basically, among a lot of the tribes, they used very similar uses. So sandals to make baskets, for securing the houses with beams and poles. And finally, the seeds are also used to make toys for the children, and they could be strung up into a nice, beautiful necklace. And this is a picture of a necklace that I actually made with Mojave Yucca seeds. If you look at it closely, you can see that there's orange beads, and those are just generic orange beads I got at some art store. But in between the beads are the little black discs, and that's the Mojave Yucca seed. So it makes a really pretty pattern. I think that the orange and the black make a nice contrast. And yeah, and basically so I just made that same pattern, and then at the end, that is a rooster talon. So the part of the rooster that people cut off because they're dangerous with them. So currently, the Mojave Yucca has somewhat been commercialized because it's found in a lot of things. To start off, it's found in foaming agents for soft drinks, which is pretty interesting. It's used also for fertilizer. A variety of animals such as pigs, dogs, and cats have this actually be part of their food. So the Mojave Yucca extract is part of the food. And what that does is decreases the odor of their waste by up to 26%. And with other animals, it's actually used to decrease the blood cholesterol of people and even in chickens. So it seems like a very healthy plant.
Apparently. I know. I checked
yeah,
my cat food, and it actually had Yucca cididra extract in it as well.
Oh wow! I didn't get to check mine, but I'm still curious to know. With livestock such as cows and stuff, it actually decreases the ammonia emissions, and it increases their weight gain in a healthy way. So I'm sure farmers are very excited to feed their cows yucca extract. And finally, which is also really cool, in young piglets, it increases their immune response to fight infection and such.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and finally, okay, I'm not done yet. I'm sorry. There's a lot of uses. There's a lot. And there's some of them are super promising, such as this one. For future use, people are actually looking into using the Mojave Yucca to treat cardiovascular diseases. So.
Yeah, I think there's current research going on with the Mojave Yucca on its medical uses for its many uses it already has commercially.
Yeah, it seems like such a good plant to cleanse your body, and it's funny because historically it's also used as a soap. I don't know if I mentioned that. I think I might have forgotten, but historically, Native people have the roots and they basically grind them up, and when they put water and they kind of mix it as a solution, it makes a very liquidy, soapy liquid. And they use it to wash clothing or even themselves. So a lot of cleaning. It's a very clean plant.
Awesome.
And finally, it is used for commercial landscaping in some states. All right, and for the conservation status of Mojave Yucca, so let's all remember, it's a plant that's basically kind of endemic to the Mojave Desert. So definitely a treasure to protect. So it is protected but not threatened. In states like in Arizona, it's actually completely restricted to salvage the plant or to harvest it. But in Nevada, it's protected among other yucca cacti in the Christmas tree, so you can't really go out into the desert and just cut one up for yourself. And given all of the uses of the Mojave Yucca, these laws that are in place to protect it. And in Baja California, so they actually, right there, you could actually cut the yucca at the base, because you know how they reproduce by by rhizomes through the roots. So you can cut it at the base, but leaving the roots intact. But recently, that rule has kind of been questioned because, if it's going to grow 0.4 inches a year, like what's the point of cutting down the whole plant? Like, might as well not even have that as a rule, because it's still hurting them. It's still hurting their population.
Definitely. I think they say that it would take 150 years for it to reach the size where you can harvest it in Baja California. So that's a long time for something to grow, only for it to be cut off.
Exactly. Yep, I agree.
I think because of its commercial use, I think it has a huge possibility to be taken advantage of. So I'm glad that states like Nevada have protected it from such devastation. All right. So we're going to open it up to questions. If anybody has any questions about the Mojave Yucca or any desert plants in general, if you have any questions for Explorer Nestor, please type them now, and we'll go ahead and answer them for you. And while we wait for any questions, I know Explorer Nestor, you took a lot of these photos that I showed on this slideshow. Why don't you let everybody know where you took these photos?
Yeah, so some of these pictures are actually from the refuge up north, the desert refuge. And if you go back Explorer Torie, I can show them. I think the picture on the beginning slide, that's one from the refuge, from the desert refuge.
Let's go.
And the very beginning. So yeah, so this picture, I love this photo because it gets our February rains in the picture. As you can see in the background, it's actually raining in the mountains.
Oh, wow.
And this yucca had barely bloomed last year when it rained a lot in 2019. Yeah, winter of 2019. So it had its fruit dried up and ready to just fall on the ground basically. So that one's from the refuge, and then the one that's at the very end is from Sloan Conservation Area. So that's down by Henderson.
Oh, this one?
Yeah, that one and the one before as well.
Cool. All right, looks like we have a couple of questions. Which yucca do you recommend for growing in residential areas and homes? So I think Explorer Nestor, do you have can you answer that question?
So as far as a yucca that would be good to grow in a home, I know a lot of people are attracted to Joshua trees, which are a type of yucca, the signature of the Mojave Desert. And I think they grow about the same rate, so it's going to take a while. But I do know that Joshua trees are more readily available commercially compared to Mojave yuccas. So if you get lucky, you could actually buy one from a nursery.
Yeah, I think even a couple of local places here in Las Vegas, you can buy them too. All right. Why is it called the banana yucca? I always ask myself that question, and I never wondered why. Do you know why it's called banana yucca for the yucca baccata?
I don't know why it's called the banana yucca, but I have some hypotheses.
Oh, go ahead, share them.
So the banana yucca has, depending on what environment you find it, it has a very long, the leaves are just really long and elegant. So it reminds me of a banana. And also, the banana yucca has a different color to the leaves. It's such a beautiful, green, and almost sometimes they actually look blue. They're not even green. Yeah. So there's also bananas that are blue. So
that could be it.
So maybe that's, who knows.
We'll look up that answer and get back to you. Can we farm yucca in a more productive way? So Explorer Nestor and I actually talked about this when forming this presentation. There is a small, or I don't know how small, there is a farm that actually produces yucca in Mexico. I know a lot of commercialized cosmetics people use it, and I saw some videos on it. I couldn't find any actual information on it. Supposedly, it was a sustainable practice where they only harvested after a certain amount of years. And one of the individuals that was advertising this area also talked about how residents could offer their Mojave yuccas to be utilized commercially on their own private property in sustainable ways. They would only harvested it so where it can keep on growing. But the research is very small. There might be a lot of secrecy in terms of Mojave yucca commercial uses. I was trying to find out how to make my own yucca acidura extract, and that seemed to be very kept under the radar. So I think a lot of this is unfortunately out of our control. And because Mojave yucca grows so slow, I think they would have to maintain these rich environments that have Mojave yucca and only utilize what is needed. Kind of like the same way they do with trees and, like Christmas trees. They make sure to keep a certain amount harvested, salvaged, and then have those grow and then, replenish the population slowly. Do yuccas have poison in the leaves? I got poked by a yucca once and on site on my skin was swollen for several days.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I do know that they're pretty sharp. They're very sharp. And I do know that if you eat the actual leaves, they're considered poisonous to a lot of pets. I would not recommend eating it for yourself. It's toxic. I don't know if it's has venom or some sort of chemical that's released when it's poked. I just know that when you ingest it, it's not very tasty and it's pretty toxic. It'll make you sick. Have you ever encountered that, Explorer Nestor?
Getting poked by
Yeah,
one?
and see if it.
Thankfully not. It has never penetrated my skin. So.
But I will say these guys are called Spanish dagger for a reason. So please be careful out there when you see one in the wild.
Oh yeah, be careful. Don't step on one.
Can we use some yucca like we do trees to combat deforestation and climate change?
That's a great question, and that's something that I'm curious about too. But what are your initial thoughts, Explorer Torie?
I definitely can think so. I think that's part of the reason why we as Nevadans protect it, because it offers so much life in the desert, and desertification is a huge. Sorry, it was the question was, can we use yucca like trees to combat desertification, which is, the drying up of systems and becoming more desertified with lack of water, harsh environments. A lot of yuccas are considered succulents, and the Mojave Yucca is no exception. It holds onto water very well. It also has a very deep, intact root system, which helps pull up water from ground sources if needed, and it helps distribute that water to other areas. So a lot of these yuccas in particular help combat desertification. They live on areas that get a little bit more water than the ground floor, usually about 3,000 to 5,000 elevation, and so they keep that water for these areas. So if the ground system wasn't there, if the yucca wasn't there and the root system wasn't built in, the water would just pass on by. It would evaporate way too quickly. So definitely yuccas are a huge combater of desertification and do help bring water and life to these communities.
I agree, and I think that honestly, I feel like if the people start paying attention to the value of this plant, I can see that in the future, people are going to want to not only protect it more, but maybe even restore land that once had yuccas and kind of like plant them there, like restoration, hopefully.
Yeah, I think so. I know there's been a lot of restoration projects currently in this southern Nevada area. So I definitely can probably see that with the Mojave Yucca. But for now, they're protected, and they are in the care of us Nevadans.
Yeah.
I think that's all the questions I see. All right, let's talk about the activity.
Okay, so for next week's activity, we have a nice little drawing activity where you can draw your own desert tortoise. Show us your art skills. We're very excited to see what you have to offer. So these are the steps as you see here on the PowerPoint, and you can send them post them on Nevada Conservation League, and we can display them next week on our Talk About the Desert Tortoise.
Yeah, so share them on our page and you might be featured next week. I just want to give a quick thank you shout out to Explorer Nestor for joining us today on the Talk with the Mojave Yucca, and we love to see your pictures and what you have been doing with the Mojave Yucca.
Thank you, Explorer Torie. It's been my pleasure. Always really fun to educate people on these plants because they're so important to our local community.
Definitely. And you can check us out every Wednesday at 5 p.m. right here on Facebook Live at the Nevada Conservation League. We'll talk about the desert tortoise next week, but until then, keep on exploring.
See you guys later. Have a good night.